Product market fit is a continual exercise of experimentation. And so you constantly have to get customer feedback. You shouldn't care about what you're building. You should only care about what you're solving. And even the word solution is almost a bit of a misnomer until it's actually solved something. You can't call something a solution. We're building a solution. Well, if you're still building it, how can you call it a solution?
It's not past tense.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you don't know if it's solved anything for anybody, but you're calling it a solution? That's a little egotistical.
Hello, welcome to Tiny Dragon, where we dive deep into tech startups mastering product market fit, even in the most unfamiliar markets. I'm your host, Elaine. Join us as we dive deep into the heart of tech startups, uncovering the secrets of how tech startups found their product market fit, turning complex insights into actionable strategies for entrepreneurs and tech enthusiasts alike. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tiny Dragon Podcast, where we share inspiring stories of tech startups finding product market fit in foreign markets. So today we have a guest, Todd Embley. Thank you so much, Todd, for doing this. Yes,
Hey,
Todd
thanks,
has
Elaine.
a wealth of experience, helping tech startups in foreign markets. So I know, Todd, you are still a host and executive producer at the Negotiation Podcast, an ex-founder Institute of Western Canada, ex-director. Spent 12 years in China from 2008 to 2016, right? And also previously was SOSV's China Accelerator Program Director. Yeah, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about your background, how you went from like Canada to China and, come back. Yeah, and so on and so forth.
Okay, so let's say in my 20s, I was at UPS for a number of years, doing more of the corporate stuff, and then I decided to switch up directions. I went to school, got my business degree, and I hadn't traveled, so I wanted to go somewhere. It was a bit of a dart throw at a map. My father had got back from a business trip. He was in the forest industry. He'd come back from China, was talking about China, and it just got under my skin. I thought, hey, you know what? That's a great place. I knew nobody, and I packed all my bags, and I was on a study visa, so I had enrolled in a foreign languages university, and through some connections from my dad, I ended up landing in a place called Dalian in the northeast of China.
When was this?
This was in 2007.
Okay.
And so I ended up there, and as every fun story has, the heroine of the story, my now wife. So I met my wife when I was in China. She is from Russia, however, and she was also there studying Mandarin. That led to us deciding to then stay in China long term. I then got the entrepreneurial bug. I started a magazine for foreigners in China, so online and offline. So we were printing as well as publishing online, doing a lot of advertorials and keeping foreigners up to date. Now, I mean, again, 2008, 2009, not a lot of good information on what's going on, and not a lot of good avenues for China companies to market to foreigners. So I went through a bunch of stuff that belongs in a book. May be too long for this podcast. A lot of ups and downs, trials and tribulations. You as a foreigner, I'll say, and as we start this conversation, that you may want to avoid getting into media in China. That wasn't a wise decision on my behalf. They saw it as media. I just saw it as advertising. But then, a friend of mine that I was hanging out with a lot, his wife and himself and me and my wife, and he was running something called eGraphs. He worked for TBWA, a big, one of those
advertising,
kind of big advertising companies. And then he met a guy named Sean O'Sullivan. Now, as we talk about SOS Ventures, SOS is that iconic naming, where he took his name and made it into SOS, Sean O'Sullivan Ventures. They've rebranded to SOSV ever since.
Not SOS doesn't help, right?
Exactly, but that's we've had to walk everybody back off of that ever since we started. So so he had a venture capital fund, and he was running a ride sharing company out of Ireland. And it was a kind of a hop on, hop off. So you use like, and he came from a mapping software background. So where he made all his money, he and a few colleagues of his or classmates of his at Rensselaer University had developed a mapping software that was essentially the backbone of MapQuest and Google Maps. Oh. And so now they were doing a ride share. You plug in where you're going, the map shows up, and then you can say how many seats you have, and people can hop on and hop off along your route, and you can charge them. So he was building a tech team out. He come to Dalian. We met him, started talking to him. He started wondering about investing into other technologies in China. Cyril actually brought up, hey, there's this thing called Techstars. We could do an accelerator. So we launched China Accelerator, which was the first accelerator in all of Asia. Wow. And then Kai-Fu Lee, who launched Innovation Works, he came in about 6 months behind us. And about 200x the amount of capital that we had going.
That was in Beijing, right? Yeah,
it was in Beijing, and then he launched right into Shanghai as well, and he had some huge co-working spaces for Innovation Works down in Shanghai as well.
Right.
And so a few years of running, we did that. A year in, Cyril got this idea that there was a lot of economies of scale with regards to hardware. So you had Raspberry Pi and Arduino and all these kind of technologies that had come up. And he thought, you know what? I think innovation is really going to take off. I think we could run an accelerator for hardware startups now. So we started Hacks down in Shenzhen.
Oh, in Shenzhen. Oh, I didn't know you were involved in both of them. Okay, I see.
All SOSV. And so launched that. And then so he left actually to go to Shenzhen. I took over the software side China Accelerator in Dalian, and then in 2013 our lease was up, and we decided to double down. And it was pretty clear that we needed to get out of Dalian, move into a major city like Beijing and Shanghai. And so I decided to move it to Shanghai. And then I had to rebuild from scratch down there. So met Bob Jung from People Squared, which was a big co-working space throughout China. And we moved into one of his spaces. I basically took over his event space for 4 months, and then carved out my own space in a new Jing'an building that he was building in the middle of Shanghai, and did that from scratch, right from the blueprints. And then we moved into there later, and then scaled that up and did all that. And so I mean that's basically. And then in 2016 I took off to Silicon Valley. I was running a co-working space. I was the director of Parasoma, which was the longest running co-working space in all of San Francisco, just a block away from the Twitter building downtown. And then headed back to Canada, as you mentioned. We spun up the Founder Institute. So I was the director of Founder Institute Western Canada for a couple of years. And then I joined Agora, which is a publicly listed company on the NASDAQ, mostly Chinese based, but dual headquartered in Santa Clara and Shanghai. Yeah. And I was running the startup program for them worldwide. And and then have been doing the podcast. So I did the China Startup Pulse while I was in China. So I was podcasting for years there. In English, telling people about what was going on the ground in startups in China for foreign companies who wanted to come there, and foreign startups who wanted to come there. And then, of course, now doing the negotiation, which is not about negotiating. It is really about negotiating the cultural divide between the East and the West to try to help companies and brands enter China and do better business in a place that, it's an enigma wrapped in an onion, wrapped in a riddle. It's very difficult to figure out China. So that's what we do, is we just explore a lot about e-commerce really throughout China and Southeast Asia, Japan, Korea. So some really, really good stuff there.
Yeah, so you were there right from the start. If it's 2007, it's right before Beijing Olympics, right?
The iPhone comes out, and it was amazing because 2007 the iPhone comes out, and you're sitting there watching nearly 1 billion people gain access to the internet within 18 months, through smartphones.
I think
And
that's when
so
Alibaba started too, right?
Alibaba, and then
Yeah,
Tencent,
right.
and there was QQ, there was Baidu,
Mm.
and then later on, you had Xiaomi, and you had Huawei, and then of course now it's Pinduoduo, and it's Xiaohongshu, and it just like Meituan, yeah, crazy, right? So
Your Chinese
yeah,
pronunciation is perfect for these
it's funny.
companies.
Everybody asked me if I could speak Chinese, and I really can't. I couldn't hold a conversation, but I
Yeah.
would get in a taxi, and the taxi driver, "你会说中文吗?" and I'd be like, 我的中文非常不好. And they would look at me with the most hilarious stare because they're computing. So you're telling me that you don't speak Chinese
But I'm listening
in
Chinese.
perfect Chinese. What is
Yes.
happening here? So yeah, but I just got really good at saying,
The few sentences.
我的中
All
文非
right.
常不好.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, now it's post COVID, hopefully. What are some of the recent market changes you've seen? Now that you are back here, but you're still doing the podcast, educating people about,
Yeah.
the China. What have you observed? Like, where have the market needs differed?
Where to start?
Yeah, I know.
On the positive side, e-commerce has exploded and has continued to explode.
Mm,
You obviously have the main Tmall, Taobao, the main platforms in China, and that is just this raging battle. Supported by the Xiaohongshus, the Pinduoduo, obviously the ByteDance, and the TikTok version over there. And Meituan, all kinds of things. I mean, it's just e-commerce everywhere. And an interesting, side kind of, ancillary, growth over there is just, digital payments,
mm.
which grew like crazy. And that was almost also a phenomenal thing too. And
WeChat Pay and Alipay, right?
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it was the WePay, Alipay, all those things. We can talk about that later, but the rise of internet banking really was started and grew up in China.
Mm.
And so that was also really, really fun to watch, and Ant Financial, and all those kind of things. But I think e-commerce now, you have, Shopee and Lazada in Southeast Asia. And, for those who want to get ahead, just keep an eye on TikTok Shop.
Mm.
They're coming hard, and they're going to become an e-commerce platform, and it's going to be kind of fascinating to watch how they do. So those changes, I mean, in COVID, post-COVID, there's been this work from home,
Yeah.
obviously, like the co-working space industry really kind of took it right on the chin. And
Yeah.
so like People Squared and WeWork and all of them, they had to close a lot of doors.
Mm.
But it's created different lifestyle. You saw things, different market segments, like home kitchenware,
Hmm.
like blenders and pots and pans. All of a sudden, this entire generation, mostly millennials, who didn't know how to cook, are now forced to, because they have to stay at home.
Learned
And so
the past 2 years. Yeah.
yeah, so it's bred an entire opportunity there. Obviously, Meituan, huge. Meituan's the skip the dishes of China.
Mm.
Plus. They're never just one thing. But that's been pretty amazing. Obviously we're seeing economic growth slowing
Mm-hmm.
in China. But I wouldn't be deterred by that, because that's literally a matter of just, you couldn't possibly grow that fast for forever. You just
Mm.
can't.
Mm.
It's just a saturation point has to happen. And
Right.
so we're starting to get there. I think it's also a really, really interesting time for foreign brands, going either way, because through COVID, there was a lot of foreigners who decided to go back home.
Mm.
So I think the expat population in China really started to kind of shrink.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be at its lowest point since 2005 or 2000. It's super compressed now. It's swelled. I mean, 2015,
Yeah.
there must have been 500,000 foreigners just in Shanghai. And
Mm.
now it's down to about 70. So
Mm.
it's really, changed. Therein lies the opportunity, though, right? And those are just some of the basics of entrepreneurship. Everywhere there's a problem, for those that are willing, that's the opportunity.
Right.
So
So
a
are there
lot of room to run.
certain sectors you think that are growing, in the China market?
Oh, well,
Certain sectors of businesses.
Yeah, like from a high level, macro level, I think obviously AI, yeah, I know, beat to death, but AI, China's king. And I mean, anywhere that you have copious amounts of data, I think AI is going to be strong. And nowhere is there more data and more data collection that's been happening for a longer period of time than in China. So that's incredible. Electric vehicles,
Okay.
I think is
Well, Elon Musk is
unbelievable.
there still, right?
Yeah. I mean, and you look at Warren Buffett and his
BYD.
massive 300 into BYD, exactly, doing incredible things. And we just talked with I'm her name is escaping me. Might be Chin Chen. She's the managing editor at
Techno.
oh my god, Techno, thank you.
Yeah.
And we just interviewed her, and we were talking about this a lot, where you can, for 30,000 USD, you can get this unbelievably looking electric vehicle that looks like a sports car, gull wing doors and the whole thing, for 30,000 US. So yeah, it's pretty amazing stuff going on there, that technology. What have I think e-commerce is just the raging thing to get into. I think over there, where the market is, we're seeing, I mean, fitness is huge, health and wellness is huge. Those things are just growing. The inside body, outside body, they're really starting to take their health seriously. They're really starting to take fitness seriously. We had multiple Olympics in the last 15 years there that have kind of sparked a lot of interest, and it's really being driven by a lot of the government is really getting involved in and incentivizing companies to really try to grow a lot of these industries, especially electric vehicles, and green energy is really being heavily subsidized, and grants are available everywhere. So yeah,
Interesting.
I'll kind of stop there. Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of AI, now that's an interesting question. So AI replaces certain jobs, and China has 1.3 billion people. Like, what do you think about that? Like, if it replaces jobs, like, what are the people going to do?
Well, so for such a long time, China was the manufacturing hub of the world. They're still there, but they're shifting because they've evolved to be one, if not the kind of top market in the world. And so their consumerism has grown incredibly, and they're now enjoying life, and there's a lot of wealth, and it goes quite deep. And so, the labor force, so to speak, has lessened for a lot of the manufacturer, a lot of the blue collar as well. But AI, here's the way to look at it. AI, as much as it replaces jobs, it creates jobs. So if you were doing a job that a robot can do, then it was inevitable that you would eventually be replaced. And whether we're seeing this in AI assistants or all the automated chat bots on your website, it's just you got the plugins and the pop-ups, and you can dialogue with what seems like customer service for hours before you're actually talking to a real person. It just knows how to handle it. It's so smart. And then you obviously see the evolutions with ChatGPT. And I mean, I was telling my latest web designer, I was threatening to write my entire website using ChatGPT, but I was cautioned against it because apparently Google is right behind it, being able to tell what was human and what was not. So that technology is also racing along. And then we maybe shan't get into all the potential theoretical conspiracy theory downsides of robots taking over the world stuff. But
yeah. So I guess more new types of jobs might be created, right? And
yeah.
people just have to upgrade themselves. So I'm super interested in all these cross-cultural stories that you have, like living in
Mm,
China, bringing Western tech startups over there, and maybe also reverse now, Chinese tech startups coming over to North
yeah.
America, or Europe.
Well,
Yeah,
you have to timestamp those stories as well,
of
because
course.
as Ferris Bueller said, life moves fast, and nowhere does it move faster than in China. I
Mm.
added the second part. Obviously, he didn't say that. But it's the things like, let me use China Accelerator and Hacks actually as
Mm.
examples. So we started in 2010. September 2010 was batch one.
Right.
We were bringing foreign companies
Hmm.
to China,
Good.
and we did that for a bit, but China wasn't ready.
Mm.
China mentors weren't a thing. And that was an interesting way, because anybody who's been part of a really good program knows that the quality of the mentors and those that are involved are really the kind of the key to how successful the program can be
Mm.
for you. And we were really struggling to get really good mentors that were local. They
Mm.
didn't understand. And I remember this particular conversation with one, where one year I asked him, "You going to be a mentor and whatnot?" And he said, "I don't understand that. I would never do that." Shocking to me at the time. I was new. And he said, "Why would I give away my advice for free? If I like
Mm.
a company, I'm going to invest, I'm going to take a board seat, and I'm going to just make them successful through my relationships."
Right.
I figured out how that all worked later. He was a good friend with somebody high up at China Mobile, and you could just make success happen.
Mm.
It's much more now a fair and free market than it ever has been before. And then I saw him a year and a half later. I think it was at GMIC in Beijing and Global Mobile Internet Conference. And I asked him again, and he said that he would, because the government has taken all the investors in China and mandated that they give 20% pro bono as advice and mentorship. And he's like, "Because the government's making me, I'll do it." And I was
Top
like, "Oh,
down.
wow. Yeah, top
Yeah.
down, 100%. So it started to change. But back then, I couldn't, it wasn't good. And I don't think China was really ready. And I'm not sure we understood China enough to be that ready for them.
Mm.
And so we flipped the script, and we thought, you know what, let's help Chinese startups go global.
Hmm.
We just ran into different issues.
Yeah.
I don't think they weren't familiar enough with the West.
Mm.
The West really hadn't been open to China that long. And yes, they may have watched, the DVD set of Friends, and, they may have been on Facebook, but they still didn't really understand it. So that gut instinct of being able to understand and read between the lines of what customers are telling you they want versus what they're showing you they want, they didn't know how to kind of find that product market fit by
Mm.
executing proper experiments.
Hmm.
And so they really struggled, and once again we just saw ships crashing on the cliffs of trying to enter and go west.
Yeah.
So then we continued on, and we did a bit of a hybrid. And now if we start to look at 2013, 2014, again, only a few years, but everything had changed like
Hmm.
threefold. And
Why did that
now
happen, you think?
I think all things grew,
Mm.
especially on the investor side.
Mm.
As you started to track and watch the money going, when you started to see Chinese wealth standing up Silicon Valley funds in USD, and when you started to see the laws start to change. Initially we were investing in startups through JVs with Hong Kong entities,
Mm.
and company bank accounts set up in Hong Kong. maximum frustration reached with US founders in particular, because the IRS and their rules that if a US person owned more than 50% of a company and were trying to open a bank account in Hong Kong, suddenly the IRS could come in and audit, and no bank in Hong Kong or anywhere outside of America wanted the IRS having any reason to be able to dip their toes into their business. There was so many things that were going on, but it all started to grow up. Everybody started to mature. Continuation of overseas returned, coming back, both fresh graduates and seasoned professionals and seasoned investors, and then mentors. And then you did see some success in the Googles and Facebooks, maybe not as much Facebook, but Google and Microsoft starting to do the right things and learning how to play ball with China so that they could exist and grow certain things. And it all started to just kind of go, and everybody got it. And they started, we were essentially too early by about 3 years.
Wow.
Right?
Okay.
And so, but that tenure has served us very, very well, and has, and Hacks was the same thing. Hacks was interesting because they split Hacks at one point into Hacks and Hacks Global. So they took the foreigners and put them on a track, and they took the locals and put them on a different track. And they split it that way because the Chinese just were masters of production and manufacturing. So when you're talking about hardware, they got that through and through. Right. It was more on the business side from a global perspective that they were lacking. And on the flip side, you get a bunch of entrepreneurs, they MBA graduates or something, they get business, marketing, sales. They just didn't know how to actually produce. They didn't know, they could make a slick video and throw it up on Kickstarter and raise a bunch of money. But 2.5 years later, they hadn't shipped a thing because they didn't know how to make.
Oh, wow. So, interesting.
Yeah.
So what did the teams come together then to complement each other?
You would think that would have been a good idea. But again, cultures and language and barriers, we're all there. But, essentially that was the origination of why Hacks was in Shenzhen, was like, you bring all the hustle and the ideas and we'll mentor you through things. But what Hacks was really going to give you was the manufacturing side of things. And, we would take them and introduce them and do tours of factories and meet with the managers. And we had a lot of local staff that had manufacturing backgrounds that could help navigate and do that. Eventually it got figured out. I mean, the factories also had to learn how to work with foreigners. Right. And I mean, everybody was learning.
Like a deadline is a deadline.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Interesting. So what were some of the, interesting tidbits of stories of product market fit, like, either Western companies coming to China or the reverse? Like, if you could share.
I think one of, talking about even just the process, which was always the most interesting thing to me, because this is why I loved WeChat so very much, because what we had to do was to tell the Chinese startups to stop building and start finding fit, and then we had to tell the foreign startups to stop selling and marketing and actually make.
Oh wow, that's funny.
So you had the two very different problems.
Right.
But one doesn't go well without the other, right? And so there was just, and it was frustrating because we would see them just cranking away on coding for weeks and months without, in the dark, basically not ever showing anybody, not testing, right? And this kind of goes back, if you've ever done the marshmallow challenge. One of the great insights for innovation that can be gained from that exercise is that as you're building your tower of spaghetti noodles, that you have to test, because the marshmallow sitting on the table looks like a cotton ball, and then when you put it on these little flimsy sticks of spaghetti, you don't realize it's a dense candy and is much heavier than you think and will crumble your entire structure. If you do that with only 2 minutes left in the exercise, your whole thing breaks and you end up at zero. Whereas if 5 minutes in, you build the first leg of the structure and you test, well, now you know if whether you're ready to go forward or not. And so, that was kind of the key. And we just couldn't get them. And it was this fear of failure. And that's what inhibited them being able to find product market fit, because product market fit is a continual exercise of experimentation. And so you constantly have to get customer feedback. And we had a different issue with Western founders because of their ego, and they wanted to be right with their idea. They just figured they had to go find their market for their product. They didn't have to mix and bring the two together. They didn't have to try to find a product that found, for a market. They had their idea. So it was difficult to come in and try to teach people that essentially you shouldn't care about what you're building. You should only care about what you're solving. And even the word solution is almost a bit of a misnomer until it's actually solved something. You can't call something a solution. We're building a solution. Well, if you're still building it, how can you call it a solution?
It's not past tense.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you don't know if it's solved anything for anybody, but you're calling it a solution. That's a little egotistical. So, and that's the whole thing was you need to understand the problem. What is the problem? How big is the problem? Who has the problem? And lastly, and most importantly, are they willing to pay for a solution? And until you know those things, don't build anything, right? Don't write a book unless you know that people are willing to put a down payment on the book based on the table of contents. Right. And that's the thing. And so this is where I loved WeChat. And we have these WeChat groups that are 500 person max. But what you could do is you could just go in and throw fodder and just talk about the problem. Stop talking about any kind of solution. You don't get to choose the solution. They do. All the time. It's your job to almost be a psychiatrist, sit them all on a leather couch and extract what they really want and are willing to pay for through a series of questions and really kind of throwing out examples. You have to tease it out. That's the essential ability of a great entrepreneur, is to always have the market telling them what they want and are willing to pay for. And by God, the easy thing is now you just got to build it. And it's essentially not as hard as you think to build it. But you have to be asking the right questions to know what to build, knowing ahead of time that people will probably be willing to pay for it. So you would start these groups around a problem. You basically be like a bitch session, really. You're creating like, hey, anybody else have this problem? I've created this group for people who struggle with this, and then see how many people join. If you get a bunch of people joining, great. Now you know that people are aligned, or at least feel the problem in a way that they're willing to join your group, knowing they're going to get spammed and it's going to get noisy and they're going to get notifications. And, they're already kind of throwing you currency, validating that they have this problem. And that, anyway, this gets into product market basics, but it leaves the realm of like the international stuff we want to talk about. But I could go on and on about that. So but WeChat was great for that.
Did you coach the Western entrepreneurs to start WeChat groups to listen in on what the market is telling us?
Exactly.
In Chinese or in English?
Well, because you had to translate, so it was very, very helpful. But yes, I mean, you had to go. You can take the premise, you can make a prototype, you can make an MVUP, and take that out there. The U is usable, minimum viable usable product.
Yeah.
If you can't, minimum viable product only gets you hearsay. It only gets you what people say. If it's usable, now you can track actually what they do and how they use it, which is far more usable to you. But yeah, the WeChat groups are great because you're navigating, as a moderator, as the owner of the group, you can control the chat, and so you can be throwing in articles from whatever source, whatever it was, 36KR or what have you, and you could be throwing stuff in and just ask people's opinions. Don't opine yourself. Nobody cares, and you should care the least of your own opinion. Don't sway the jury here. Just let it be unbiased and let them go. Throw it and say, hey, I just saw this thing. They're claiming this and this. Do you guys agree? What do you guys think about this? And then just stand back, watch, read, listen, take notes, and try to understand. And then if you are really particular on a particular point, you could add in, well, what about this point? Or what about that point? And then just watch. And if you can get a velocity of conversation going, and where they're all discussing this, and then later you can, like, even if you came up with a little white paper and you PDF'd it, and then you threw it up and you put a 99-cent paywall in front of it, and you threw it into the WeChat group and say, hey guys, after everything we've been talking about, I decided to kind of, like, based on my background, I think I can be a little bit helpful here. So I've done it in a white paper form. I do want to put a little bit of a paywall. So like 1 renminbi, if you don't mind donating, and something like this. But again, you're trying to get that currency, right? The proof that not only is this a problem they're willing to solve, but they will pay for the solution, right? That's the key. That's the business part of it.
Right.
You don't have a business unless somebody pays you.
So it's really community building in the beginning.
Yes.
It sounds like a
community of early adopters and customers.
Right. Even before the product is built.
Yeah, that's why it's kind of key to detail that community guideline and the entity and the soul of what that community is. Be very particular and intent with how you script the bio of what it's all about, so that you're attracting the right people.
So flipping to the other side, when Chinese tech startups go abroad, like how do they understand product market fit, like for Western markets?
Same quantity and quality of struggle, just different. It's the intuitiveness. It's difficult, but the intuitiveness of understanding what people are trying to tell you, which is why, again, I'm always pushing the payment part. Like, green, money is colorblind, so, or race blind, or culture blind. So if whatever you're doing, if you're constantly testing and experimenting and seeing if people would be willing to pay anything, even if it's personal data, my phone number, my email address, my time, my likeness, if I'm donating that to what you're doing, that is actually currency. It's things that we hold dear and we don't like to part with it, same as money. And so it's a validation that what you're doing is something worthwhile. And yeah, you can translate your way through, you can do it, but you just have to do it. And getting over the fear of saying, I may not understand this culture. It's fine. It doesn't matter.
Does language matter?
Because data is data. Language can matter. I mean, you do get into the nuances, and it's not to say that it won't, but just the validation through currency, whatever currency we're looking at, that's really your golden truth, to at least know you're headed in the right direction. And that's the key. And you always can base whether you want to continue building this or not, whether you've had that validation of currency to it being valuable in a form of somebody willing to pay for it. And so if you're gonna, once you start, it's like, you know, would you guys prefer red or blue, you know, or some things like this, then it gets a little bit different. Like, you know, one of the things in China is that Chinese people in giving you face don't want to say no. So you'll get yes all day long. It's just varying degrees. You have to figure out which yes means no and which yes means yes.
Yeah, culturally, people are trying to be polite, right? Yes.
Right, exactly. And so henceforth, it is so vitally important that you don't stop there and check it off and say, yep, we're good to go. He said yes, let's go build.
Right.
You know, yeah.
So,
But yeah. Facebook groups on this side, you know, and that was another good thing. And I would just like get a Facebook group going, you know, just get attention, get an audience. Like, don't build what you think, build what they want.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now it's up to you. Figure out how to get them to tell you what it is they want, how they want it, and how much they're willing to pay for it. And now you can make a business decision based on the cost versus, you know, the return of whether there's a business here or not. But generally speaking, you know, if the lifetime value of the customer is even 1 cent more of the cost of the customer acquisition, you're in a business that is at least making money, even if it's 1 cent.
Right, right. So you mentioned previously, like, you know, coaching the Chinese textiles versus the Western, they have different issues. Where do you think
Different
that came from?
behaviors, different, yeah. I mean, you know, it's funny because I mean, the Chinese are just, they're different, and then, you know, the West, they're different, and you're dealing with different fears, you're dealing with different egos, and you're dealing with different levers. I mean, even when I was at China Accelerator back in Dalian days and trying to invest in this founder who's really doing something really, really cool. And we thought, wow, like we can get involved and see where this goes. It's worth the investment. And then having to talk to that kid's parents to be able to
How old is the kid?
Yeah, 20.
20. Okay. Yeah,
But
families involved. Right?
they're still, you know, under the, you know, the umbrella. So just very, very different. And it was more that fear. They didn't want to show anybody anything because they couldn't accept negative criticism, because if they went to market and it failed, they were done, and they'd have to return to their home city and go work at that job at the bank that their dad got for them, and, you know, can maybe start to unshame their parents going forward, you know, their unemployed son or daughter, you know, just like totally different things.
Right.
And then in the US, it was to try to slow them down from the ideas and just try to achieve, like, ideas are worthless. Nobody cares what you think and what you want to build. Like, unless you're really doing groundbreaking technology, you're leveraging existing technology to try to break into something new or to solve something. But it was so hard to get them off of their idea and just understand that you're solving a problem. Nobody gives a crap about what it is that you think everybody needs.
You're right.
And then so I would just flood them with investors right away, because investors are very good about going,
break their
how
egos.
do you know? How have you proven this? What proof do you have? Like, you say this is great, but an investor is really good because an investor doesn't care what a founder thinks about his own company. What a founder cares about is, like, show me the data that says there's 10,000 people who care about what you're building and are willing to pay for it. Then I'll invest.
Right.
But I don't even trust I don't even care what I think about what you're building. Why should you? And the only people the only opinion we care about are those people out there. And until you have that opinion in data form that you can show me, well, I'm not going to care either, because I only care what they think. And frankly, there's
it's the market.
The only one you should care too. Yeah, exactly.
It's the market. Yeah. So that's really interesting. So what are the biggest mistakes you think startups should avoid when expanding to another market?
So don't do it alone. I think that you need to be resourced. You need to go in knowing that your gut instincts are going to be all wrong. You also need to understand actually how much are you rebuilding and starting from scratch.
Mm.
You cannot go in thinking that your product in its design form or packaging, that your marketing in design form or packaging, even your sales structure, you're going to have to rewrite your entire email drip campaign. All of it needs to be completely redone.
Mm.
And do you understand that? And do you know that it is like you had success in your home market, and home being cultural home, but
Mm.
you have a lot of gut instinct and intuition from growing up in that place, surrounded by that place, that did you a lot of favors that you probably didn't realize you're not going to have any of that benefit going to a new culture.
Mm.
So you have to get help.
Mm.
And, you wouldn't climb Everest without a Sherpa. You need to have boots on the ground, and you need to start looking at locals, and you need to put the ego away and start listening, like really listening.
Mm.
As much as you've done listening to the market to be successful where you are, you're going to have to double down on that, because you aren't going to really truly understand
Mm.
when you go to another market what they're actually saying. It's not just going to come instantly to you. It's going to be a learned skill of reading between the lines. And you just see too many. I've seen just too many startups raise a ton of money. At Parasoma, and we had a ton of French companies who were funded out of France. And then that was the thing. And don't get me wrong, you got to go to the big markets. This is how you get the big money. Because
Mm.
if you're sitting in a small market, eventually you're going to have to go.
Right.
But and another mistake, they go too early.
Go.
Really, really spend more time nailing your home market and
Mm.
understanding who you are. You really, really have to be able to refine the essence of what made you successful, including all the luck that you had, and calculate that. Don't count on that again. And where you were able to be better than your competitors, and
Mm.
then take all of that refined advantage that helped you win, and then layer that on top of the new market and see if it
Mm.
still fits the same way. Do you still have those advantages?
Mm.
But and if they're not there, it's not a stop sign or a quit. It just means that you may have to find new refined advantages in that market through just an analysis of what that market, and especially the competitors there, are like, and how they operate.
Mm. So usually at which stage would, like, say, a Western tech startup go to a foreign market like China? Like they have to already hone in on their
Yeah,
home
I mean,
market, right?
typically to me, international expansion, it's it's like hitting a nail with a sledgehammer here, but it's Series B. just
Series B.
just as a thing, like series, you get your growth stage capital, you get your Series A to really dominate, and then Series B is where you can really start to look at that. I mean, you have to be in the tens of millions of a round, because it's going to take a lot of money, right? You're gonna have
Mm.
to hire, you're gonna look at a lot of loss, a lot of mistakes. You're just running experiments and whatnot, and it's just really, really, important that that you be able to do that. So
So
yeah, I would say it's a Series B.
if it's tens of
um
millions, then the tech startup already it's a pretty big organization, right? With like
yeah.
head of global expansion. Like, do you think the CEO still needs to be in the trenches going to the foreign market, or delegating that role to somebody who's more familiar with that foreign market?
um well, it depends. I know,
Mm.
terrible answer. This is gotta depends on the vertical, and whatnot.
Mm.
Like if you're highly tech, and
Right.
this is very programmatic, I think the CEO is going to be involved at some point. If this is more of a let's say like a product penetration play, you could probably turn something over to the CMO, or have a head of expansion or something like that. The ways to do it are really, I think, raise some of your money. If you're raising a Series B and that's your plan, get some of that money coming from that country, right? Bring them into the round. That's going to be that's just your best way to do it, right? If you want to go to, let's say you want to go to Indonesia, right? 240 million people, big market. You want to expand into there. Bring in some Indonesian money. Get some skin in the game from some people who are widely successful there and leverage their relationship. It's going to make things so much easier, right? And then they'll know how they get you set up and whatnot. I think that would be a great way to do it. The other thing you can do is you can do market entry through acquisition. Right. So you can go and you could probably buy some team, buy some local audience attention, and maybe acquire and integrate, keeping everything somewhat separate for a certain period of time. And you really just want to avoid being the type of CEO who remote controls from abroad and doesn't let the local team and the local entity operate at local speed in local ways. And that, I mean, that
we see a lot of those, right?
Well, it's some of the biggest failures of trying to go into China that we experienced was having and just watching that happen of just the CEO just helicoptering over that expansion far too much instead of just, resource training, the whole thing. Like you prepare your SEAL team 6 as best you can. But then when you take it to the shores, you drop them off, they've got their local guides, they're resourced, they've got all their equipment, they've got all their everything they need to do. But then you need to just drive away and
hands
trust
off
that they're going to do. Yeah.
Just report the ROI, right? Yes.
Right. Exactly. Which is, again, when you've been obsessed with your company for 4 or 5 years and now you're suddenly going into a huge market for the first time, you're going to have to relinquish the reins a little bit. You just got to have to loosen the grip. Like there's no other way to do it.
Interesting.
But you just have to be really good at hiring.
Right. Okay. So what are some of the success cases that you've seen? Both sides, like,
You know what? They're not as many as you'd think. It's it was interesting. I thought Uber was actually very successful entering China. They got out what they put in. They didn't make anything, but they did walk away with a significant chunk
of Didi.
Of Didi, and as an ownership, as a stake in that deal, which was worth probably far more than they were ever going to make being there themselves, operating individually anyway. And I think if you're not local and you're entering a new market, please don't ever have the big BHAG, right? The big, hairy, audacious goal to be the incumbent, because that will never happen. Especially if it's a big, vast industry like social media or something like this. You will not unseat the top that if they're local. I mean, we're seeing that pushback even just with TikTok today, where the US is just convinced that this is a Chinese entity, and they can't be convinced otherwise, and they're going to do what they need to do to, I don't know, tie a piano to its heels so that it just can't be as good as it possibly could, despite how many people use it, and it goes vice versa. But if you can go in, you can definitely be successful. You can be a threat to competition. Highly unlikely that you'll be number one. And I think that's kind of what we saw with Uber, where they were willing to go in. They made a huge splash. and they got out what they put in, and then left with a very nice sizable chunk of DD in return as a nice exit package. That's, and that chunk is worth billions of its own. And so, yeah, I mean, I think they were big winners, but not a lot of people know about that.
How about the other way around? Chinese companies coming out. By the way, I've noticed like companies like Insta360 is a Chinese company, right?
Is it really? No.
Yeah, like DJI. Actually, it has the same camera lens somehow with the DJI products also. So, but you always kind of like don't know that it's a Chinese company. It's not even positioned as a Chinese company,
Yeah, and I mean they try to. I think, and I mean, I was asked, why hasn't Xiaomi been just so much bigger everywhere than it has been? And maybe they got a little gun shy after what happened to Huawei. Again, another good example of great product, all kinds of things, but then the media and the politics get involved, and they basically try to ruin a company's name. Why? Because they're not local. They're not controlled, right? They're going to see, too much revenue is going to flow across the ocean, and we just can't have that, right? And it's just this mistrust and whatnot. And so, very, very difficult. And, I hope that one day that it's not that way. I'd love to be buying a BYD electric vehicle,
shipped over here.
yeah, exactly. But we're, in a way, we're still waiting for it to be, one world.
Yeah. Okay, so last question, like to summarize, what's one takeaway from this interview you think our audience should learn from, when going to foreign markets, trying to find product market fit?
Yeah, there's a few. Try to narrow down. I mean, again, I'll go back to don't do it on your own.
Don't do it on your own. Okay.
Like,
how do you find somebody you can trust? I mean,
get them invested in the upside.
Okay.
Right. So that's where, like, if you want to go and you want to expand, definitely, hire with equity stake, or bring an investor into what you're doing, so that they're, again, you can rely on the money to do the talking for you, in that they're going to be helpful and they're going to be interested. They're not just going to throw their money away. They're going to want you to be successul.
Yeah.
So their money's worth.
You're in the same boat, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. That's good advice.
And try to get, good partners. Try to hire really, really well. And, if you can get some agency help, it's so valuable. It's so valuable. Get some mentors, reach out, be well resourced, have an understanding of that it's going to take longer than you think. It will be worth it in the end. I would only go in with, if you have multiple product suites of different things, go in with your hero products, keep it small, go with just like your main ones, and try to use those to get in and do just those things well. Keep it tight. Don't think that you can just copy paste things that were successful from marketing and sales and other things and playbooks that you have into new markets. You're going to have to rebuild those. So go in knowing that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry, it's not one, but
so just pilot tests and not try to swallow the ocean in one go, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
absolutely.
Awesome. So last thing is, how can our audience contact you?
I love LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on it. It's got messaging. I'm there, generally keep it up to date. That's a great place to go. And I mean, selfishly would promote the podcast, because we talk about all these things like AI and electric vehicles. We've had a bunch of, we had Crystal Tai from Jing Daily. We had Yaling Jiang from Following the Yuan. We've had, of course, Chin Chen from TechNode. We cover a lot of it. We even talked about the Barbie movie and its success over in China and how well it did. And,
right.
We get into a lot of very interesting things, and we branch out across Southeast Asia. And that's the other thing, is don't sleep on Southeast Asia as well.
Okay. All right, so the audience can find Todd on LinkedIn at Todd Embley, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you so
You
much,
can
Todd, for your
Google me,
time.
you'll find it.
Yeah, yes. All right. Thank you so much, Todd, for your time. And it was fascinating, your stories about your experience in China and the West. All
Thanks,
right.
Elaine.
Thank you.